We have of course left the best until last when it comes to GT7 1.54, the Suzuki Jimny Sierra JC. Some improvements technically on this car over the standard, or in other words just the Jimny that we had in the game already. It's got a bit more power, it's also a bit heavier though, it's a couple of grand more expensive, quite literally at 20,000, so it's by far the cheapest one here and quite the juxtaposition compared to the 20 million credit Mercedes, but of course it begs the question of why is it here and is it worth buying? For the sake of 20 grand, well, most of you have probably bought it anyway, and even if you haven't, you'll probably win one from a roulette spin or something. It's that kind of car. But I am curious about why this car was added. Although we talk a lot about how bad Polyphony's communication is, one of the things which I actually really would love to know, and as far as I can tell, I don't think there's really any discussion being had on this, at least with Kaz himself. I don't know who makes the final call on what cars are or aren't added to the game. We like to refer to it as Kaz, but I don't know if he maybe delegates that in some cases, or if he really does decide on every single vehicle. I'm sure he has at least some level of involvement there as the director of the game, but I presume he's busy with quite a few things, so you never know. To follow that point though, what I find curious is why in a game like GT7, and I used to say the same thing about GT Sport, when vehicles being added are at such a premium, and I'll return to that point in a second as to what I mean, particularly when it comes to updates, even more so in 7 than Sport, would something like this be chosen to be included? Particularly when you factor in what we keep getting told, and keeps getting repeated by the community about how long it takes to develop each and every car, mapping it into the game, etc. With all of that in mind, let's go back to my point about being at a premium. What do I actually mean? Well, back in the day, this being doubled up with another Jimny, or even more versions if you wanted to have them, wouldn't really have been that big of a deal. In GT2, 4, 5, 6, that was just par for the course. There were dozens upon dozens of needless duplicates for the most part of many cars, but the weird thing is, most of us didn't really care. In fact, I made a series back in GT6 called Which One Should You Buy, and I would talk about all of those duplicates of S2000s, RX7s, and I don't recall being particularly negative in those videos because with 1,200 cars in the game, who really cares how many Skylines there are? That's what I mean by vehicles being at a premium. Now in Sport, and arguably more so in 7, because yes, there were more cars in the game at launch than GT Sport had, but the offset to that is far fewer vehicles and updates after the fact, when each and every one of those matters more. When you get, for example, 3 cars over an entire month, sometimes over a couple of months, well, each one of those 3 is a much bigger deal than it would have been back in the days of GT6 even. So why then, when it's such an important slot to fill a vehicle with, would you go for something like this? And that's one of the reasons why I would love to know the thought process of Kaz or whoever has these suggestions or final thoughts on what particular vehicles get added. In some cases it makes sense, like the ambulance for example. In others, not so much, and this is one which I would love to know the story on, in a similar way to having 2 different versions of the Clio, for example. Now to speak to the point of this one being different, it is, but let's say it as it is. It's no way near different enough to need to be an addition to an existing car. If, for those who do love this car, you want to argue the point that it's actually superior, well then that just shifts the point to the other Jimny instead then. Why have that one instead of just having this one to begin with, or instead? So either way, you can't really have your bread buttered both ways. You've got to pick whether or not this is better, or if it is better, it still begs the point of why the other one needs to be there at all. This one I would say is the superior car. Being 2 grand more, who cares? Being a little bit heavier, who cares? It does at least come with 100 horsepower stock, which is more than the other one. I believe it has more torque as well, if I recall correctly, and of course it has a slightly chunkier visual style with those wheel arches in particular, so it's a better looking car, you could justifiably say. Plus of course, from day one we had the K-series engine swap, so in addition to being able to already build this thing up around 300 horsepower even on the standard engine, which is already really good, you can go way higher than that with the engine swap, up around, what is it, 580 or something like that you can get out of the Honda engine. So if this one is indeed, as it certainly seems, so far superior in every single way, why have the other one then? And that actually annoys me the more I think about it, because if you imagine the situation being the other way around, imagine that instead of having the other Jimny, and now this one, making this one, for many of us, myself included, have kind of a sour taste. Imagine if instead of that, we didn't have the other one, and put this car in that car's slot. Well now, it would be the Jimny like back then, which we for the most part received very well and it was a lot of fun, except it would already be a better Jimny as well, meaning that the other one would be meaningless, and you wouldn't need to have it in there. So no matter what way you slice it, it comes off as a bit of a waste waste of space. Now I'm sure there are some people who will fiercely defend the car, who maybe own one in real life and love having multiple variations, but those people are the outliers for the most part. That is not the vast majority of people who are clamouring for stuff like an F10 generation M5, or an E60 M5, or a C63 AMG, or any long list of other cars which have no duplicates, no other versions in the game at all, and yet are justifiably icons of the franchise. And that's not even to get into the numerous JDM cars, which of course would make so much more sense. I mean, we literally have 2 Jimnys and no Mitsubishi FTO. Just let that sink in for a second. We have 2 Jimnys, no DC5 Integra. I mean, justify that. It just doesn't make sense to me. Overall, it's not a bad car, and as I just alluded to, I actually kind of feel sorry for the car, because were the scenario that I just explained what had actually happened, I think everyone would be happy about this one. I would be even happier, because I recall being pretty happy about the Jimny before. This one is unfortunately the runner-up. It's in the other car's shadow, and as such, a car which in pretty much every way is actually better than the other one still comes off as kind of a waste of time and seems a little bit lazy, which again goes back to my point of why I'd love to hear at least the reasoning on why something like this was added. As controversial as they are, that's it for my thoughts, and I would love to hear yours. Maybe you do love the car. Would you have preferred having this, maybe instead of the other one, rather than as well as? And if you are one of the people who likes having both, well then I'd really love to know why. Overall, regardless of the Jimny and certainly my mixed thoughts on the Porsche Mission X, I'm really happy with the update overall. Despite not having a circuit, which I don't think many of us really expected anyway, I would say there were still 2 or even 3, to be honest, really strong cars out of the whole thing. The Porsche is fantastic, I still stand by it being the best one. The Escort is superb, absolute legend, and lives up to the legend. And of course the Mercedes, although prohibitively expensive for many people, is a whole lot more enjoyable to drive than it easily could have been. And with that being said, that's it for my thoughts on 1.54. I'll see you next time with more GT content, and of course, thanks for watching.